Permission to be Powerful is a reader-supported publication. To receive new posts and support my work, consider becoming a free or paid subscriber. It sat there, right at the entrance of Barnes & Noble, Codependent No More. It felt like a divine conspiracy, like the universe had left me a message I couldn't ignore. I picked it up, skimmed the first few pages, and something inside me shifted. The words reached into my chest and pulled at a problem I couldn't name until that moment. For years, I had lived my life in someone else's shadow. We were attached at the hip. I had no friends, no social life, and no time for myself. And I called that love. I didn't know it then, but buying that book was the beginning of the end. At the time, I thought I had everything I wanted. A partner who loved me, a marriage that looked solid from the outside. But beneath that was a constant, quiet pressure, a slow erosion of self. It wasn't just the little things, like never choosing the music on road trips or being unable to have a night to myself. It was bigger than that. She dictated where we lived and who we saw, who I could still be close to. At some point, without realizing it, I had become an extension of her life, rather than the main character in my own. I'd mention wanting to see my family, and suddenly, there'd be tension. A guilt trip. A list of reasons why they were terrible for me. So I stopped trying, stopped calling as much, stopped making plans, until one day, I looked up and realized I was completely isolated. That day at Barnes & Noble, I was trying to browse. A simple trip to the bookstore, like we always did. She'd lose herself in the aisles, and I'd follow. But that book was waiting for me. Codependent No More. I flipped through it, and suddenly, it felt like I wasn't alone in my experiences. I read about the patterns. How codependents make themselves small to keep the peace. How they twist themselves into knots to keep their partner happy. How they forget who they are in the process. I wasn't the romantic, devoted partner I thought I was. I was drowning in a dynamic that I couldn't even see clearly. It was a gut punch. I wasn't choosing love. I was choosing survival. When I first started setting boundaries, the resistance came fast. I wanted to take a salsa class. She got upset. I wanted to spend time alone. That turned into a fight. I wanted to reconnect with my family. That was treated as betrayal. The book had planted a seed, but breaking free would take much more than reading about it. It would take tearing my whole world apart. When I first started setting boundaries, the resistance came fast. I wanted to take a salsa class. She got upset. I wanted to spend time alone. That turned into a fight. I wanted to reconnect with my family. That was treated as betrayal. The book had planted a seed, but breaking free would take much more than reading about it. It would take tearing my whole world apart. I remember the first time I realized I had been conditioned to ask for permission to be myself. I had spent so long walking on eggshells and making sure she wasn't upset that I forgot how to do things just because I wanted to. It sounds small, insignificant even. But the first time I decided without factoring in whether or not she would approve, I felt guilt. A deep, crushing guilt. That's when I knew. I wasn't in love. I was in captivity. The collapse didn't happen overnight. It came in waves. The first few fights were explosive, but I held my ground. Then came the emotional whiplash. Manipulation disguised as love. I just don't feel close to you anymore. Why are you being so cold? If you loved me, you wouldn't need space from me. And for a while, I believed her. After all, wasn't love supposed to be all-consuming? Wasn't I supposed to sacrifice for it? But every time I picked up Codependent No More, I saw our relationship spelled out in black and white. The control, the guilt, the cycle of dependency that had defined our whole dynamic. And worst of all, I saw myself. The version of me that had let it all happen. There's always a moment when you know it's over. For me, it wasn't a fight. It wasn't some grand betrayal. It was a realization. I was more afraid of leaving than I was of staying. And when fear is the only thing keeping you in a relationship, you're not in love. You're in a cage. I knew if I didn't walk away, I'd keep shrinking. I kept losing parts of myself until there was nothing left. So I left. And she didn't take it well. There were tears, accusations, even moments of tenderness where she begged me to reconsider. But I had finally seen the truth. I wasn't responsible for her happiness. I wasn't obligated to set myself on fire to keep her warm. I was allowed to exist for myself. Leaving wasn't the hard part. The hard part was learning how to exist without being needed by someone else. For years, my identity had been wrapped around that relationship. My worth was measured by how much I could give, how much I could sacrifice, and how much I could prove my love through self-denial. But suddenly, there was no one left to take care of. No one to walk on eggshells for. No one dictated how I spent my time. And I had no idea who I was outside of that. It hit me all at once. The space, the silence, the uncomfortable realization that I had spent so much time adapting to someone else, that I had no real sense of what I wanted. I used to tell myself that love meant never leaving. That meant sticking it out no matter what. But Codependent No More dismantled that illusion piece by piece. It showed me that love isn't supposed to feel like a job you can't quit. Healthy relationships don't demand self-erasure. That my need for space, autonomy, and individuality wasn't selfish. It was human. I realized I had been confusing control with closeness. I thought she loved me if she wanted to be involved in every decision and needed me by her side 24/7. But that wasn't love. It was a possession. It took time. But I started doing things just for myself. I reconnected with old friends. I picked up hobbies that had been shelved for years. I danced without asking for permission. And for the first time in a long time, I felt light. There was no tension in my body when I got a text. No dread when I made plans. No guilt for wanting to be my person. I was free. And I realized something. I had always been free. I had just forgotten. If there's one thing Codependent No More taught me, it's this. You don't have to prove your love by losing yourself. You don't have to stay small to make someone else feel safe. And you don't have to be afraid of walking away from something that doesn't serve you. Leaving that marriage was the hardest thing I've ever done. But in the end, it wasn't that book that destroyed it. It was the truth. And the truth, once you finally see it, doesn't let you go back. Until next time, Anton Dancer, writer, Buddhist. Permission to be Powerful is a reader-supported publication. To receive new posts and support my work, consider becoming a free or paid subscriber. Phoenix Lights, the mass sighting that no one can explain. March 13, 1997. Phoenix, Arizona. Thousands of people, including the governor of Arizona, saw a massive UFO, mile-wide, slow-moving, silent, 5 huge lights, hovering over the city, then vanished without a sound. The governor held a press conference, brought out a guy in an alien suit, laughed it off. Years later, he admitted it was real. He saw it with his own eyes, and the government knew damn well it wasn't flares. The weirdest part? The official flare explanation didn't fit the timeline. The lights were visible for hours. Flare smoke should have been everywhere. And military flares don't hover in formation over a city. So what was it? A secret craft? Or something else? Even today, no one knows. The Pascagoula abduction. The night 2 men were paralyzed by aliens. October 11, 1973. Mississippi. 2 men, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, are fishing on the Pascagoula River. It's quiet. Then suddenly, a blinding blue light. A metallic oval-shaped craft descends. Humming. 3 beings emerge. Not the little gray aliens everyone expects. These things are robotic. No eyes, no mouths, just claw-like pincers. They float toward the men. Then, paralysis. They can't move. They're lifted off the ground, carried into the craft. Inside, a large mechanical eye scans them. Parker, only 19, blacks out. Hickson? He sees things he can't explain. Then suddenly, they're back on the riverbank. The UFO is gone. They rush to the police station, tell their story. The cops don't believe them. So they leave the 2 men alone in a room. A hidden tape recorder running, expecting to catch them in a lie. Instead, the men keep freaking out. Shaken. Scared. I know people won't believe us, but I wish I was dead. That's real fear. Years later, more witnesses came forward. They saw the craft too. And Parker? He spent his whole life avoiding the spotlight. Because what happened that night was too real. The Japan Airlines Flight 1628 incident, the UFO that was bigger than a city. November 17, 1986. A Japan Airlines cargo plane is flying over Alaska. Captain Kenju Terauchi, a veteran pilot, is at the controls. Suddenly, two glowing objects appear. They start following his plane. Then, they vanish. Terauchi thinks it's over. But then, he looks down and sees something massive. A dark floating object. Bigger than an aircraft carrier. Bigger than a city. It's blocking out the stars, following them. The FAA tracks the whole thing on radar. They know it's real. Terauchi tries to shake it, but it follows them for 50 minutes. Then, it vanishes. The official report? The pilot was hallucinating. Even though radar confirmed the object was there. Even though multiple FAA officials later admitted it was real. But hey, the government has a habit of making things disappear. Even truth. The Valensole UFO encounter. The farmer who was paralyzed by a UFO July 1, 1965, France. A farmer named Maurice Masse is tending to his lavender fields. It's a normal morning. Until he hears a strange whistling sound, turns his head, sees a round metallic craft hovering nearby. Next to it, two small beings. They don't look human. They have large heads, pale skin, and huge eyes. Before he can react, one of them points a strange device at him. Zap. Masse can't move. He's frozen in place. He watches, helpless, as the beings inspect the field. Then, they get back in the craft, and it shoots into the sky. Masse collapses. He can move again, but something changed. His crops? They start dying in a perfect circular pattern. The soil? Radioactive for years. Even the French military investigates. And Maurice? He never recovered. His health deteriorated. He became withdrawn. Almost like whatever they did to him broke something inside. To this day, no one knows what really happened in that field. But something left a mark. And not just on the crops. The Cash Landrum incident, the UFO that gave people radiation burns, December 1980, Texas. Two women and a child are driving home. They see a massive glowing diamond-shaped craft, hovering over the road, surrounded by 23 military helicopters. It was blasting heat, so intense. It burned the pavement. They had to get out of the car. They watched it hover, then disappear. Hours later, they felt sick. Severe nausea, skin peeling, hair falling out. They had radiation burns. They sued the US government. The military denied everything. No record of aircraft. No record of helicopters. No explanation. If the government wasn't involved, what the hell was that thing? And why did military helicopters chase it? The Chicago O'Hare Airport UFO. The one that punched a hole in the sky November 7, 2006. United Airlines Flight 446 is about to take off. Suddenly, pilots, ground crew, and passengers see a gray metallic disc. It's hovering over gate C-17, just sitting there. Then, it shoots straight up, at impossible speed, leaves a perfect hole in the clouds. The FAA refused to investigate, said it was weather, but dozens of aviation professionals saw it, and they said, that was not weather. Something came in, and then it got the hell out. USS Roosevelt UFO, the one that harassed fighter pilots for years 2014-2015. The USS Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier. Fighter pilots start seeing weird objects on their radar, flying insanely fast. No exhaust, no heat signatures. Then, they start seeing them with their own eyes. Spheres, cubes inside spheres, moving at impossible angles. One pilot had a near collision. The object zipped past him, then vanished. These UFOs followed the carrier for months, like they were watching us. Then, just like that, they disappeared. To this day, no one knows what they were. But they were real, and the military couldn't do anything about it. The Zimbabwe UFO landing. A message from the future? A school in Zimbabwe. 62 children see a silver disc land near their playground. Small figures emerge. Dark suits. Big eyes. They don't speak. They send thoughts into the kids' heads. One child says, "They warned us. The Earth is dying. Humans are doing too much damage." Then, they get back in the ship and vanish. What the hell was that? Were they trying to warn us? And why were they so interested in kids? So, what the hell is going on? Think about all these stories. Different people, different countries, different backgrounds, but the same patterns. Things appearing out of nowhere, moving at impossible speeds, interfering with nuclear sites, military bases, and pilots. Some seem friendly, some seem dangerous. But they all have one thing in common. They aren't supposed to exist. And yet, they do. Governments have covered them up for decades, but now, they can't hide it anymore. And the truth? It's weirder than we ever imagined. And maybe that's the real question. Not what's out there, but why we're being told about it now. Because let's be honest, the government has never been in the business of truth. Not when it comes to war, not when it comes to money, and definitely not when it comes to things that could break reality as we know it. So why now? Why declassify just enough to stir the pot, without tipping it over? Maybe the real story isn't the UFOs. Maybe the real story is who controls the narrative about them. And if that's the case, we're not just looking for aliens anymore. We're looking for the people who decide whether we get to know the truth at all. They don't want you to know. I shine the light. Every day, you're fed half-truths, distractions, and carefully curated narratives. Whether it's UFOs, the depths of human psychology, or the hidden forces shaping your reality, they decide what you're allowed to see. I don't play by their rules. I dig deeper. I connect the dots. I expose the patterns they hope you'll ignore. And if you've read this far, you're already seeing it. The stories they dismiss, the data they bury, the human behavior they exploit. Most people, they stay in the dark. You see the cracks in the illusion. That's why VIP members get the full picture. No filters, no censors, no convenient omissions. What I uncover inside the VIP reports, the suppressed files and declassified documents you won't find in mainstream headlines, the psychological tactics used to manipulate public perception, how they shape what you believe, upcoming disclosures and what they aren't telling you. If you're fine with the sanitized version of reality, keep scrolling. But if you're done being spoon-fed what they want you to know, become a VIP subscriber now. Because truth doesn't wait, and neither should you. Until next time, Anton, dancer, writer, Buddhist Permission to be Powerful is a reader-supported publication. To receive new posts and support my work, consider becoming a free or paid subscriber.